Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. So this topic is, it's something we see a lot in the energy healing world, in the consciousness world, in the holistic world. And it's interesting because this is a big shift. We have reconditioned ourselves in the Western, especially in the Western, what we consider the Western world, right? We have conditioned ourselves so much in culture to be reactive that that's all we run from, right? We propel ourselves from being reactive. We do a lot of our lessons from being reactive versus being proactive. And you know, it sounds like a cliche, you know, it's the stuff that we've talked about, like back when I was even in corporate, it was something we talked about all the time. But you know, it's being being proactive versus reactive. And we talk about that all the time on how important that is to be proactive in terms of so many things in our lives, right? So like we used to joke when I was in corporate, there was like the big, the sign that people would hang up that, lack of planning on your part does not institute an emergency on mine, except that's how many of us live. That's how a vast majority of us live, especially in what we call the Western world. So the challenge that we have as energy healers, alternative healing practitioners is this: when we get into holistic health, 95% of holistic and integrative health has to do with being preventative. And yet, if we run our entire culture, our entire experience off of being reactive, then it's there's limited possibility in the alternative and integrative world for the best match, the best situation, the best way it works out. Because here's the thing, it's funny. When I first left corporate, I did this, and I've talked about this many times. I created an organic herb nursery because I just really went through a very early midlife crisis. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do organic. And I had done, small time organic gardening. I had not really done a lot of research into commercial level organic, growing. And so I had met a bunch of organic growers that's what they did. And so they had said to me, one man had said to me, he said, when you first change over to organic, he said, so you were brought up conventional gardening and then you went into organic. And he said, I'm going to tell you something. He goes, when you first get into organic, you're going, like most people, they have the same mindset as conventional, but they just change over to organic. And he said, well, so that works in the short term, but then you end up like stressing out and killing yourself over things you can't control. And he said, eventually you'll get to a place where you realize how everything balances out when you allow it to be, more proactive. And when you look at the whole picture, right? And this is funny because I had lived this way in a holistic way for a while already, for years. And yet I hadn't really thought about it, but he was right. And the first couple of years I was like trying to manage bugs and disease and all that kind of stuff in the greenhouses. And then finally I found a way to, I have to really look at the soil quality. I have to really look at, the air quality and how dry or humid it is. I have to look at this. And when I managed all of that proactively, instead of putting fungicide on stuff or pesticide on stuff or whatever, thinking, okay, now I don't have to worry about it. Well, then all of a sudden I didn't have to even put that stuff on, because when I was managing it from the back end, from the front end, actually, of how it's, hold on a second, on how it was, like how it was to be in a much more balanced and holistic way for the plants, a healthy environment, then I didn't have to really worry about the other stuff. Because then when something did come in that could potentially harm, say, the plants, like a bug or something, then its natural predator would come into the greenhouse. Because, North Carolina, I would leave in the summertime. Obviously, the doors were open all the time. So, it's the same way with our health. And yet we don't really think about that. We think the way we have grown in Western, culture, Western medicine has been, this is what the symptoms are. This is what I'm going to do to alleviate the symptoms. And we have forgotten about what's underneath it all. When I first started getting into holistic health years and years ago, I was going to a naturopath who said to me, and it was one of the best things, and I've said it so many times. He said, holistic health is like, he goes, doing things holistically. And I like using the W with holistic, WHOLE. He said, it's like driving a car. I said, if you do a lot of maintenance on the car, like you get the oil changed, because you don't have to be crazy about it. You get the oil change, you get spark plugs changed, you get, everything updated and cleaned on a regular basis. He said, then when something does happen, it's minor and it's easy to manage. And he said, it's the same thing with our health. It's like we go in, and he goes, and if we do a lot of proactive stuff and we maintain, we take care of ourselves proactively, then when we have something that happens, then it's actually less than it would have been had we not done that. But then also and he said, there's a complement. Obviously, it's not like you have to do Eastern or Western medicine. It's like there's a complement, right? So, and I'm getting to my point here with energy work, just give me a sec. But he's like, and so it's like the car goes 0 to 55 and that all preventive stuff. But then the 55 up, you can get into an accident or whatever. Well, that's the Western medicine of emergency, something I can deal with right now. And he's like, but it integrates. It's not one or the other. And that's the same way with our spiritual consciousness. It's the same way with our presence and our experience in our life. And yet we've gotten into this habit of managing everything. Look at all of our marketing, look at all the advertisements we see. It's all about managing the symptoms, but don't worry about, like it's too much work to take care of yourself in a preventative manner, where, and there's a lot to be said about like Eastern culture that is very much more whole life, more looking at underlying issues, core underlying issues and stuff like that. So there is an integration. And people come to me and they want to change things, and it's usually because they are in a crisis situation. That's where it usually starts. And so the mind says, help me alleviate this crisis situation. I'm just not happy. I'm having some kind of major crisis, or I've lost my job, or I'm really sick, or, and a lot of times they come to me after, they have gone to all these doctors, or the doctors say nothing, there's nothing we can do. And they just finally, something in them says, no, there is something I can do. And I'm going to go look someplace different. Just because a pill doesn't work, or this particular procedure doesn't work, doesn't mean that I can't change something. And that's when they start getting into the understanding of really knowing that underneath everything, there are core underlying issues that drive everything that we create in our physical reality. And so that's the journey of consciousness, right? The journey of consciousness is recognizing that we create our reality, and that it's time for us to take self-responsibility. And it's time for us to, in that self-responsibility, say, well, why am I creating this in my reality? Why are these symptoms here? Not how do I alleviate the symptoms, but why are these symptoms here first and foremost? And what is there for me to change so that those go away? Okay. And now we do, of course, have the complement of how to alleviate the symptoms, which is great. So it's not all one or the other. That's what I always tell people. It's a combination of both. Like I was talking about with, the organic gardening, and then, with medical stuff, and so it's the same thing with our consciousness. But the thing is, the consciousness is very, 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 very connected. Not only is it very connected, it's the cause of our physical issues. It's the cause of our environmental issues. And when we work in energy healing facilitation, what we do is help you really look at things from a holistic standpoint, from that whole consciousness of, all right, somebody comes in and says, well, I want to change this, or this is really bugging me, or this is my emergency. And then I start saying, okay, how about this? And then they sometimes look at me like, I don't understand. And that's the connecting into intuition and asking guidance, asking their higher selves, what is really the issue here? And that's when we start talking and start picking apart stuff. Well, then that becomes really uncomfortable to the ego. Okay. And so, there have been conversations that many have. It's funny because it took a long time for, say, like psychology to get on the docket, right? To get people to not think, that you were uh, a bad person for having to go have a psychologist, or, go have therapy, or, have to have something really wrong, or whatever. So that's finally become more like mainstream. And that's great. But then when does usually somebody want to do work on their psychological health is usually when they have a problem, right? So the funny thing is, the same kind of, and it's like, when do you want to do something about your physicality or your physical body, your health, is when you have a problem. Oh, I got my blood test back and I had bad numbers. Oh, I had a heart attack. I had an accident, right? No, accidents are accidents. It's all part of the physicality of the messages that we're giving to ourselves. And it's like, okay, so what have I been ignoring that I haven't been looking at within myself, that I've now had to cause myself a physical symptom to look at? But the problem is we've forgotten that it's just a symptom, and that when we're just look to alleviate the symptom, we're forgetting that there's a whole core underlying issue. And if you go ahead and alleviate the symptom, which we do have some great medicine for, we have great, all kinds of even alternative integrative therapies, all kinds of tools out there in all kinds of ways, right? Alleviating the symptom is great, as long as we commit to not just alleviating, but to resolving the underlying core issue. So let me give you an example. When we have issues, there's so many, like, I can't even think of one. So when we have things that show up in our life, like, say we have a job that doesn't pay well, and that it's just sort of like barely helping us pay the bills and all that kind of stuff, right? And we sort of don't like it, but we believe that we only have to work, that the work is only to pay the bills and not to enjoy, right? Then we have relationships that we bear with, and decide, I'm gonna stay in this relationship because it's comfortable, or it's known evil and it could be worse, right? And I have say a car that just like, I'm always paying for something to be fixed, and yet, and I haven't gone and gotten something new or anything because of all the other things, right? And, oh, well, I have these allergies, I have this chronic whatever, I have migraines, and it's just such a hassle to try to manage these symptoms. And I'm taking all these pills, and I've even tried herbs. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about, this is a hypothetical situation, because I don't have any of that. I used to have some of it. Now it's all gone, right? So it's a matter of saying, okay, well, let me look at the whole picture. That's what holistic means. Let me look at the whole picture. So I've got all of these elements in my life, and it's like, oh, well, they're all tolerable, right? But then what happens when the car breaks down, or I lose my job, or the relationship breaks up? Well, then I go into crisis mode. And then in crisis mode, I go, oh, well, I want to change this. I want to be happier. I don't like this crisis mode. I want to be comfortable again, right? And that's usually what drives us. I want to be comfortable again, not I want to be fantastically blissful, because we have come to a place where we accept mediocrity as comfortable, right? And I'm not saying that with any judgment. It's just with observation. So we say, okay, this is good enough. This is good enough. I just want a car that works. I just want to be able to pay my rent every month. I just want to be able to. I just want to. Blah blah blah. That means I just want to get to a comfortable place. And so there's so many elements that are underneath that, right? There are things like, I'm unworthy to have more than that, right? So I'm only worthy to have barely enough to survive, right? That many have that. There's no trust in the bigger picture. Right now, I'm going to go through the 7 elements of the Wonderland program that Sarah and I have going on. That is really the basis. It goes through all the basis for all of this. I have no trust in the bigger picture. I have no trust in myself. I don't trust that I know myself. I don't trust that I know my body, right? Because look at what's the word? It's uh, sabotaging me. That's not the word though, but yeah, the body, my body is deceiving me, or not deceiving me. Oh my God, betraying me. That's the word. My body is betraying me. And because look at it, it's just breaking down. And then we become victim, we play victimhood to age and all kinds of stuff, or heredity and all that. Oh, look at all this. And it can be so overwhelming that we just say, yeah, I'm just going to plunge through one day at a time, because that's just the life those are the cards I've been given, right? These are things that people say every day, all the time. And when it's just comfortable enough, when it's bearable, there's not a lot of proactive, searching or commitment to being proactive to say, well, when I do this, this doesn't happen. So it's funny. And that's what happens is people come to those of us who do alternative healing. And then they say, well, they come with that same mindset of reactiveness versus the holistic proactiveness. And so, and they say, oh, well, I want to change this. I want to fix this. Yes, Gloria says age is just a number. Absolutely. But we've decided that it's some big, thing that we need to be victim to, right? So, like people come to us, or many come to us, or we come to and many still do this when we get into energy healing. And it's a matter of shifting our whole mindset. And then when people say, change your mindset, that's what that's about. It's actually letting go of those kind of ways of managing our reality and saying, I'm going to the very core of the foundation, right? So I talked about worthiness, right? Worthiness, that I am worthy to have this blissful life. I'm here. I am divinely worthy, and I can be blissful, and I can explore and embody that in everything that I do. Wow, that's a lot for anybody, for many, many to say. Like, I have many discussions with people who just don't even know where to start with that, right? I trust in the universe supporting me. I trust that I have my back. I trust that my expanded self knows what it's doing. I trust that even if things don't look great, that if I'm still committed to that bigger picture, that it's going to work. Like, there's that trust, right? Then you've got the guidance, is that, we've come to in separation this belief that others have more information than we do. So therefore the doctor is going to know my body more than me. The psychologist is going to have, my body more than me. Or even the psychic is going to know more than me. Like I even had a client recently who I've talked about that, they did all the spiritual consciousness work and all, like, years of it, and then would still go to a psychic to get an answer because they didn't trust their own guidance. So there's like learning how to really trust guidance. So there's the worthiness, the trust, the guidance. And then there's this forgiveness and apology for all the stuff that we hold energetically in our physical body, things we regret, we have guilt for, we have anger, we have resentment or blame or shame or doubt and all that kind of stuff. And then there's then we judge, right? So the judgment then is waiting for apology and forgiveness. And then we have self-responsibility for the creation of my reality. And the shadow side of, in separation, we created the shadow. And yes, the shadow is just as important to me as my light. The dark is just as important, because the light does not exist without the dark. So there's all of this kind of stuff. And then there's, the coming back to self-love, coming to that place with all of this incorporated. Self-love is what gives us that foundation of proactivity. And to say, I am going to commit to myself because I am worth it. I am so worth it, because I am this incredible divine being that I have embodied as me. I have embodied as me to be the full note in the symphony that I could be as this embodiment that I created, that was really important to create. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here in this way, right? As part of the whole. And whether you want to call it the quantum field or God or one or whatever. Now, we've talked about that, and we talk about that in our courses or whatever. And I don't mean to, and I'm not doing a shameless plug, but I am doing a shameless plug because it all does tie back to that. And the point here is, many come to us and they say, fix this, put a Band-Aid on this, please help me put a Band-Aid on this, because I'm having this problem. And then what happens is we start doing work at the foundational level, and they'll accept that for a while. Many will accept that for a while they feel like there's some discomfort or friction that's going on that's really making them uncomfortable, right? But then what happens is, as we start to shift stuff at the foundational level, it's like a domino effect. It's a ripple effect. It starts affecting everything instead of this one thing. So they think they're coming for a shoulder that's in pain, or the allergies, or bad relationship, or cruddy job, right? Or there's 1,000 different things. But then when we start to, like unraveling, or like taking apart that knot, right, it starts to affect positively all these other things. So then what happens often is that then, and it's usually a last resort when they do come to us, because like they've tried everything else, right? Well, then they get to this place of, I am feeling much better. Things are much more comfortable. Yeah, there was a little bit of discomfort and having to change some things and letting go some things, but yeah, things are looking up, and they might have a big shift, which is great. And they might have some progress, which is great. But then the mind, the ego says, and there goes back to the worthiness and the self-love or lack of, saying, oh no, this is enough for us now. This is enough. This is enough for me. I'm good. That's good enough. I'm comfortable again. And then it's too much work, too much focus to have to, reprioritize my life to make it really better, because this is just comfortable enough. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying this with judgment. I'm saying this with 10 plus years of observation, right? Doing this professionally. And it's like, well, when do we get to that place where we recognize that if we are proactive and we commit ourselves to looking at the bigger picture, then we never, ever have the need to create those emergent situations in the first place. And that's what our mind has a challenge grasping. It says, well, what do you mean? Like, oh yeah, all I know is that if I have a problem, I want to fix it. But what if you never have a problem? Well, then I'll just miss that glory of the suffering and the challenge to accomplish something. It's like, but what if we just came in and allowed ourselves to be in that bliss and be that bliss? And that would mean being proactive, looking at our whole being, looking at our consciousness just as much as our physicality, looking at how to stay clear so we can listen and we can trust to what's inside and what we know. How we can be, come to a better place of worthiness, how we can celebrate ourselves as the divine beings that we all are, and how do we start recognizing that within each other, within ourselves first, and then in each other as equally divine as we do that. So as I'm talking about that, so here's the thing, when that lines up, and people always ask me, well, how do we fix the world? And I'm like, well, that's how we do it, is go inside and commit to that proactivity. Because when we become holistic, truly holistic, and we focus on the whole and not just the symptoms and the reactivity, then we start to see the bigger picture, and we start to be able to emanate, and we love ourselves, so then we love each other so much more easily and more unconditionally. And then that means we work together better, and we honor each other better, and we are happier where we are. So therefore we don't blame each other. And then we start to collaborate and come back together and make that new loom in that holistic standpoint. And that changes everything. They've done studies that have shown that there was a couple of them, a number of them actually now, but I think one of the first ones was they did a big group in like Washington, D.C. Excuse me. And they did mindful meditation for like an hour. I think it's like an hour a day for like a month. And they had this population, I think they got together. I'm a little rusty on I'm going to have to go back and do the research on this, but they did this exercise of this experiment of, okay, we're going to meditate for an hour a day, mindful meditation, for X amount of time. Well, they took note of, and so they want to see how it affected the immediate vicinity. And they did it in an area that was really pretty high in crime and stuff. So they took note of where the crime was, right? And then they took note of where crime was as they progressed in the study. And they found that the crime rate of the whole area actually went down just by that group. And it was like a couple hundred subjects, I think 200 or 300 subjects. But I will go and look at that up so I can post it. But, they went and found that the crime rates went down the whole area. So look at that. Just quieting the chatter, going within, becoming more centered, changes the energy of what surrounds you. And the more of us who do it, the more we link that together back into our oneness and in proactivity, the more it starts to alleviate and heal this stuff just by that presence of the vibration that we create through that centeredness. So when we talk about meditation and people say, oh yeah, I just don't have time for that, it's like, but that is core, foundational, to take time, to take focus, and it's nourishing yourself. It's not a chore. Taking the space and the time to quiet the chatter of the egoic mind, to become centered and quiet, so that then you become more aware, you become more calm and at ease, you become more centered and connected. And then you start to listen to what the expanded consciousness already knows, which we can access at any given point. And then we become more proactive, because then we know what to do to keep everything in balance or in wholeness versus like trying to fill a hole. So that's the foundation. And yet we have a lot of resistance to that self-consciousness because of just judgments and all kinds of stuff that have to do with why we, enjoy this lack, the separation and the experience of lack and stuff like that. But it's like we have gotten lost in it in many ways. And so to come around is not to say, I just want to fix this symptom. But often that's how we get to it, because that's the way, the expanded consciousness is, okay, well, if you're going to ignore all of these, we're going to have to create some kind of symptom that's so uncomfortable. You're going to seek it out, an alleviation, so that you will now find that proactivity, that holistic way of existing. And then sometimes we do it only until the symptoms go away. And then you go off and say, oh yeah, I'm going to go back to my reactive ways. And sometimes it takes a half dozen times. Sometimes it takes 300 times. And that's just our individual journeys, and that's the thing to honor. But my choice is to be as holistic and proactive as possible. And that's my profession. That's my crusade. That's my commitment. So when someone is ready, willing, and able to embrace that, that's really what I really enjoy. And that's my commitment to myself. So I really enjoy those who are committed to that within themselves when they come to me, because then I'm like, okay, great. Then it makes my job easy, because I'm just helping you remember how to do that. And it's changing our mindset, changing the way we see the whole picture versus put it into all these little boxes of separation. And it's not hard. It's a lot of stuff when we hold like a 3,000 boxes of separation and compartmentalization. But as we go back to that foundation, it starts to melt away all of those boxes and allows it all to come back together. That's the integrative word that goes along there. So look at that within yourself this week. Look at what there is for you to change in your foundational understanding. And if I became more proactive and holistic about my consciousness and about my existence here, what would that look like? What am I ignoring now, or just being reactive to now, that I could change to be more proactive? And then what happens is you never have the sickness anymore. The chronic illness goes away. Your body adjusts, or your physicality adjusts, your existence changes, your relationships change, your job changes, where you live, everything changes for the better in a more calm and flowing and blissful way. And then we say, well, why didn't I want that? Why didn't I let myself have that in the first place? It's like, well, the lessons that we chose. So on that, this week, look at that within your life. Look at where you're still being reactive, where you're still like thinking you have to suffer through. or thinking, okay, well, what symptom is showing up? What symptoms are showing up, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. What's the fifth one? Or environmental. um, environmental meaning like relationships, job, things around you and in your environment. So look at all that and say, am I throwing up big symptoms of discomfort for me to look at that might be a big message for me to look at a more holistic foundation so that I could be proactive. And then these things that are little minor discomforts that are starting to become symptoms can just go away, because that's what happens, just like that. So keep that in mind, take a look at that. And thanks for joining me. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.